What's up everyone, Darcblade here with a follow-up video to the patch 1.5 regarding the multiplayer balance changes for Mass Effect Andromeda's multiplayer. BioWare have been listening to fan feedback and have addressed multiple things for the multiplayer. The highlights including the effectiveness of some of the heavy hitting enemies. For example, Hydras, Remnant Destroyers and Berserkers are now more likely to target nearby players. So the closer you are to the enemy, the more likely you'll get aggro. This is also supposed to counter the effectiveness of repeated melee attacks from players. They've also made a number of changes to the Outlaw Faction to increase their difficulty, as before this balance update they were by far the easiest faction to take on. They've also made changes to the assault rifles and pistols, not in any bad way, as they feel that these weapons were underperforming, so they have been buffed slightly. They've also ensured a risk-reward playstyle to melee-built classes. Before, melee builds were far too easy in the game, but now enemies can actually interrupt melee attacks, leaving you open to taking damage. This may make some melee builds less viable, although I don't think it's going to completely eliminate melee builds altogether. BioWare have also stated that they're continuing to look at balance changes, especially regarding the higher difficulties in the game. They're also looking at melee focused builds to ensure that they pack the right punch, as BioWare states. This is probably because they want to keep an eye on them to see if the nerf was too much or too little. But firstly, going into a bit more details. Firstly with player abilities. First with melee, they've reduced the effectiveness of repeated melee attacks against tougher enemies. Players' melee attacks can also now be interrupted by enemy attacks. I've said in previous videos that the melee was a little bit too strong in the multiplayer, and it seems BioWare have agreed. Next with challenge tracking, the biotic tech and combo detonation challenges now update on the challenge screen correctly. Lance and Throw will also now successfully increment the biotic detonation combo challenge progress as well. This should come as great news to a certain someone I know who was very pissed off that her tech detonations were not being tracked. Next with Stealth Grid, that caused Stealth Grid to deactivate immediately after being used. However, they mentioned nothing about a fix in regards to when an ally uses it on you and then you go down, and then when you're revived you're constantly stealthed, although you don't have any of the stealth bonuses. Next with Biotic Ascension, they fixed an issue that prevented the kineticist from gaining Biotic Ascension charges when she was not the host of the match. Next, moving on to the weapons, there's quite a lot of changes here, and a lot of the weapons, you have to remember, are ranked between 1 and 10, so their damage values can change. I'll say the minimum damage number and the maximum, and then what it's changed to. Firstly with the assault rifles, the Mattock. They fixed an issue that prevented the Mattock from reaching its designed rate of fire. However, they've lowered the damage per round to partially offset the increase in rate of fire. They've lowered the damage per round from a minimum of 71, maximum of 89, to a minimum of 50, maximum of 63. However, they've also increased the spare ammo capacity from a minimum of 112, maximum 140, to minimum of 160, maximum of 200. Next with the Sandstorm, they've increased the damage per round from 112, minimum, 134 maximum, to a minimum of 140, maximum of 168. Next with the Sweeper, they've increased the damage again per round from a minimum of 60, maximum of 72, to a minimum of 64, maximum of 77. With the Valkyrie, they've increased the damage of this weapon from a minimum of 80, maximum of 93, to a minimum of 86, maximum of 99. And lastly, for the assault rifles with the Halberd, they've increased the damage per round from a minimum of 73, maximum of 90, to a minimum of 92, maximum of 113. Next, moving on to pistols, the Predator pistol. The Predator also now benefits from the rate of fire adjustments applied to the Mattock assault rifle. They've increased the damage per round from 38 minimum, 51 maximum, to a minimum of 54, maximum of 72. However, they decreased the rate of fire from 500 to 450. Next with the Carnifex, they've increased the damage per round from 155 minimum, 195 maximum, to a minimum of 175, maximum of 220. This is great news for me personally because I actually love the Carnifex weapon and I'm glad it's seen a buff. Next with the Hornet, they've increased the damage per round from 37 minimum, 49 maximum, to a minimum of 44, maximum of 55. With the Phalanx, they've increased the damage per round from a minimum of 106, maximum 113, to a minimum of 133, maximum of 142. And finally with the Scorpion, which I didn't actually think this needed a buff, but they've increased the damage per round from a minimum of 428, maximum 512, to a minimum of 485, maximum 580. Next with the shotguns, the Hesh shotgun, they've increased the spare ammo capacity from 40 minimum, 50 maximum, to 60 minimum, 75 maximum. Now moving on to the sniper rifles. The sniper rifles were in pretty good place in the multiplayer, but they've made slight adjustments to, firstly, the Shadow. They've increased the damage per round from 27 minimum, 32 maximum, to a 38 minimum, 46 maximum. With the Indra, they've increased the damage per round from a minimum of 84, maximum 101, to a minimum of 105, maximum of 126. And finally with the Vanquisher, they fixed a bug that caused the Vanquisher to have an extra 100% headshot bonus. I actually didn't know this existed. I knew the Vanquisher was very powerful, even so far as people calling it Vanquisher meta or go home, but it seems that BioWare are keeping an eye on this weapon. I still think it's very powerful and probably one of the most viable weapons in the game, but it shouldn't be the be-all and end-all weapon. Next, moving on to general balances, the weapon reloads. They fixed some timings of the reload actions so they better match their animations. Whether this will lead to reload cancels, I'm not so sure, but hopefully it will. Next, moving on to booster adjustments, the Assault Rifle Amp 3. They've adjusted this so it properly states it gives you 30% boost instead of 35. However, this was a text error only, as the actual booster only really gave you 30%. Next, moving on to quite a few changes here with the enemy factions. Firstly, the Ket. The Ket Anointed. Players can no longer avoid damage by standing up in the Anointed's face when it's firing. The Ket Ascendant. The Ascendant's Orb will now give 50 points when killed instead of points equal to the Ascendant himself. And finally with the Ket Behemoth, these foes are now likely to target nearby players. Moving on to the Outlaw changes now. BioWare have acknowledged that these guys were by far the easiest faction, but BioWare have tried to change them to make them a little tougher. Firstly, the Outlaw Audi, their dogs. They no longer attempt to chain sync attack you. Next, the Outlaw Agent. The Outlaw Agent's holographic clone will no longer yield points. Next, moving on to the Outlaw Sharpshooter, who's had a ton of changes. Firstly, the Sharpshooter now fires more frequently, especially against targets out of cover. The Sniper Rifle also has increased damage by 44%. Sharpshooters will also sprint more often. The aiming time is now shortened the closer you are to them. The aiming and impact audio are also now clearer, and they will no longer pursue melee targets over long distances. Next, with the Outlaw Berserker, which is the Krogan, the Berserkers are more likely to target nearby players. And finally with the Outlaw Hydra, the sync attack is now lethal. Before it wasn't, when it was supposed to be. The Hydra is more likely to target nearby players again. The Hydra will also lose their target if they go cloaked. However, this will not stop them from firing in the general direction the cloaked target was. They've also fixed some situations where the Hydra's body would reappear after being destroyed. However, this was a graphical bug, nothing really more. Moving on to the Remnant, BioWare have admitted that the observers were a little too good at their jobs, and often players had a hard time against them. Personally, I thought they were tough, but I liked the challenge they gave a player. However, they have been nerfed. Observers will now lose their target if their target uses Tactical Cloak. Their maximum beam duration has decreased from 6 seconds to 5 seconds, and their beam damage has been decreased by 10%. The Remnant Nullifiers have also received some changes. Firstly, their rate of fire has been decreased against enemies who are in cover. Their projectile attacks now travel faster and hit harder though. They also stay still and fire in more situations, and they no longer flee in protracted melee situations. Also, for the single player only, these enemies will fire less frequently on the lower difficulties. And finally with the huge Remnant Destroyers, the Destroyers are more likely to target nearby players, and they fix situations where the Destroyer's body and turrets would reappear after being destroyed, similar to the Hydras. Again, this was just a graphical bug, nothing more. So there we have it for the multiplayer balance changes with patch 1.05. As you can see, BioWare are listening to our complaints. I'm disappointed in one way to hear there's been no changes to the combo system, although I personally still think combos are completely viable. I'm glad though that melee has been nerfed because it was far too easy to take on missions with melee based characters. I'm really glad that assault rifles and some of the pistols in retrospect have been buffed. Hopefully they will find a more regular place among the player base. and I'm also glad to see that Outlaws have become potentially more threatening. But anyway, what do you think about this patch? Are there any things you wish they had included, or are there any of the changes that you absolutely hate? For example, do you hate that melee has been potentially nerfed with the risks that enemy pose melee builds? Leave a comment down below. And until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you a balance update video regarding patch 1.05 for Mass Effect Andromeda's multiplayer. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.